It's March Mania at Sports Interaction, NHL, NBA, March Madness, MLB, and so much more. We got crazy odds and the best live in play. Download the app right now in Ontario. Use the QR code at the bottom right of the screen or head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN to get started. 19 plus, please play responsibly.
Welcome to Nailing the Apex. I'm Tim Hauraney. Please head on over to Spotify. Give us a 5-star rating and a follow. Same with Apple Podcasts. Write a review if you could, because it helps us a lot. You can follow me on social media at Tim Hauraney. Saudi Arabian Grand Prix review. And here to help me break it all down from the Scuderia F1 Pod, here is Mr. Mark Dailey. Dailey, how are you, man?
I'm good, man. Thanks for doing this with me tonight. Looking forward to jumping into this one.
Yeah, we got a lot to talk about.
We do. Boy, do we ever.
Give Mark a follow on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod. Okay, let's start with the big news. Obviously, Fernando Alonso being reinstated back into third place. Daily, what did you make of all of this shenanigans?
Yo, man, shenanigans is the word. I mean, did we not learn anything after Abu Dhabi in 21? No. It's just like, I feel like this is like this circular evergreen comment or conversation, I should say. And I feel like, but I want to know, what does Esteban Ocon think about this? I mean, 2 weeks ago, he was just like, it's like, oh, you looked at the race director the wrong way. That's 5 seconds. Comes into the penalty or to serve his penalty. Oh, you did something not right quite there. That's another 5 seconds. And then, fair enough. Like, Fernando did misalign himself in his grid position on the starting grid. That was fair enough. But the whole thing that was kind of weird was that there was nothing untowards when the penalty was served during that safety car. And then I think, like everyone else in those last 3-4 laps, when George's engineer gets on the radio and is like, well, Fernando might be getting a penalty here, I think we're all kind of like, hey, wait, what? I mean, there was never an indication that we saw, nothing I heard on the comms flipping through the different drivers that suggested that there was any investigation going on by the stewards. And then when it dropped after the race, I was just like, what?
So I talked to the team afterwards. So even like they didn't get notified until after the checkered flag. That's how late this went. And
yeah,
right? Go ahead, dude.
I was going to say, it's just so silly, right? Because it affects both George and Fernando both negatively, right? Fernando, 100%. if he figures he's got a pace advantage over George, he can adjust, he can adjust on the fly there and try and open up a big enough gap. Whereas George knows that Fernando's going to have a time penalty. He can, try and increase the pace and try and keep that gap within whatever that window happens to be. So, this served neither driver, I think it did anybody any justice, and at the end of the day, they come away with egg on their face. I think they just look silly, right?
Yeah, so we're taping this late on a Sunday evening. Take you through this penalty and then everything else chronologically. So obviously at the start of the race, like Mark, you had mentioned, Fernando slightly askew in his grid box, something similar to what we had seen with Esteban Ocon. Alonso takes the lead of this thing and then is notified that he's got a 5-second time penalty to serve at some point. So team bring him in on, I want to guess, it's around lap 20, I think. There was still probably about 60% left of the race still needing to be run, but Alonso comes in for his first stop, pits, and the team basically that's when they're doing their 5-second time penalty. The rear jack person touches the car with the jack stand. At the time, what ended up happening was, the stewards, they had been informed by both race control and the ROC, and they determined that the penalty had been served properly. So, but the ROC Daily, which is relatively new, it's in Geneva, and the ROC is the remote operation center. So if you're a soccer fan, it's kind of like VAR, but I don't think it's to that level. Like VAR is very, very good, and I don't think the ROC is just there just yet, That's not saying that they won't be. They will. But it's relatively new. So towards the end of the race, the ROC is still sort of going over all of the things that are happening within the race, and that's one of the things that they're still looking at. And so the ROC then reports back to the race control. Race control then reports back to the stewards on the last lap, and that's when they received the report from race control and ROC and determined that the penalty was actually not served properly. And the team wasn't alerted until after the checkered flag. So there's a lot that goes into this. So the FIA stewards reference an article, and so they sent me all this information. And essentially, this really comes down to wording and how certain things are worded. So if we go to 54.4, it is mentioned that whilst the car is stationary in the pit lane as a result of incurring a penalty in accordance with Articles 54.3A or 54.3B above, it may not be worked on until the car has been stationary for the duration of the penalty. Then I got a whole bunch of notes. So obviously they come in and they got to argue about this, right? Because essentially what we're talking about here is wording, and wording in a specific way. So Aston Martin sporting director Andy Stevenson, basically what he does is he compiles seven different examples of the same thing where crew members were touching a race car in the same form and fashion, not working on the race car. And these certain examples that he provided, those teams were not penalized. And so then the stewards, having looked through all of this, they agreed, that it wasn't a penalty. And all because of a way something is wording. When someone is touching and not working, right? And it's a good point that they make, but they also look at it as, I think, they've not exploited, but they've caught something here in the rules. And so I expect that's something they'll look to reword, I think, and maybe clarify at some point. But for now, it worked in Aston Martin's favor, Dailey.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. It's just like, why all these other times was it not a penalty for these other cars serving, penalties for whatever reason? And, the rear jack stand is in the same position, doing the same thing that Aston Martin did, and it wasn't enforced that time. So it just comes down to that sort of lack of consistency, right? And I just find it really strange, right? I mean, you and I were kind of joking before we went to air, saying this is like in a basketball game, like right at the very end of the game in the fourth quarter, with like a minute left, like the opposing coach goes up to the referee and say, hey, remember that foul you didn't call way back in the first quarter? Why don't we go take a look at that? If it was a penalty, it was always a penalty, and it should have been noticed right away. And it's just like, I don't understand why it kind of had to go to the ROC, because I'm sure there's somebody in the pits standing there making sure that they got eyes on it, that this is done properly. Because I mean, when we had the last week or 2 weeks ago in Bahrain, I mean, there were how many penalties did Esteban get in Bahrain? I lost count. It was at least three.
I believe it was three.
Yeah,
there was the procedure. In the grid box, and then there was the speeding in pit lane, I believe, and then I think the other one was the crew working on the car, working.
Yeah, they were actually doing things, because I don't think they actually in that situation was a little bit different. Well, maybe it was. I don't know if the jack was engaged just like they did for Fernando today, but I think for Esteban was they actually started doing working-y things, if that's I'm going to get really technical here, before the second hand ticked over 5 seconds. So they started trying to remove tires or whatever it was.
Yeah, because I think Otmar had mentioned that they were going to consider leaving about half a second after the 5 seconds because I believe they jumped on it just a few tenths too early.
Exactly, yeah.
And got slapped with that other 10-second penalty. So
yeah, you know what this kind of reminds me about, Tim, and I know we talked about this at the time a couple of years ago, was just all the lack of consistency enforcing track limits. Back in 21, it seemed like they would be enforced consistently at some races and then others, and there was this big debate at the time. It's just like, like exceeding track limits is going to be the theory's got to be the same for every corner at every track at every race, or else, like, what's the point of enforcing track limits? So I know that's like a completely different thing. That's the car out in the track and a driver, cutting a corner, whatever it is, or going way over on the curbs like you do in that final corner at the Red Bull Ring. So, I mean, it's slightly different, but it was just the same thing. The lack in consistency of when to apply like track limits kind of feels, it has that same feel that this whole thing did here, but just really weird how it all evolved and kind of like afterwards. And I took a while to catch up to the fact that Fernando's podium was reinstated after it got yanked away from him after the race, because I was sitting there in the drive-thru getting my coffee this afternoon, and I'm scrolling through my Twitter as I'm waiting to pull up to the window, and then all of a sudden I see, and it was like a tweet at that point was 1 hour old, and Fernando was something to the point saying it's be great to finally get my 100th podium. I was just kind of thinking, dude, did you not hear your podium got taken away? And then I get home about half an hour later, and then I start seriously looking at the news and my email and everything like that, and then I start catching up. I'm like, oh boy, here we go again.
Well, the thing is leaving these decisions so late, and this isn't the first time that something like this has happened. And I just we've talked about this before. It's just kind of, how do you speed that process up where you're getting the penalty happening within the race, right? Not within post-race. And so, how do you speed that up? So Fernando Alonso's celebrating on the podium, and then boom, it's all taken away, and George has been promoted to third. Then George is in the FIA press conference room, and not Fernando, and we're all just like, wait a second. And so So my question would be, is how do you speed that up, right? Like you see in other sports, NHL, NBA, NFL, things happen immediately, right? We get the results right away, or they go to a review, and then eventually we get those answers, right? And it only takes a few minutes, but you're still within gameplay. Gameplay has not ended. So how do we do that in racing? That's what I would like to know, man.
Well, exactly. When, like I say, just a couple of minutes ago, it's like when there was nothing that immediately was the concern of the person that was supervising and overseeing that the team didn't do anything during that stop itself. It was something that came up all this time, afterwards. That's where I find the disconnect. The person that was actually watching it live didn't flag anything, and it goes to the Rock or the ROC, whatever. I think the Rock sounds cooler, actually. We'll go with the Rock from now on. Apologies to Dwayne Johnson. Anyways, it just, there's a disconnect there. And I think that's where we're all going to be kind of scratching our heads and then watching with interest to see how this evolves in the time ahead. Because, the next thing, as you were describing this whole situation, is that there's going to be some clarification that's going to come down from the FIA saying, this is a proper procedure. This is what you can't do. This is what you can do. And this is how we're going to be controlling and monitoring the situation to make sure that you comply with the parameters of a 5 second or 10 second, whatever it is, the time penalty that needs to be enforced. I think that's the only way to solve it.
Let's talk about Sergio Perez, because obviously you have to give him his flowers, right? He did pretty good this weekend, man. He did pretty good. Happy for old Sergio. It was a good result for him. Good, and for him to be so close now to Max in the championship standings. And then also on top of that, Verstappen coming from where he did, starting 15th and then just working his way up through the grid. Pretty impressive. That Red Bull, man, it is lights
crazy
out. The DRS on that thing is wild, dude. Wild.
It's just watching Max carve his way through the field today, like a hot butter through a block of, or a hot knife through a block of butter, or whatever the saying is. That's what it was. I mean, he was just slicing his way through. I mean, the way he made Lewis just look like he was standing still, the way that he just blew by the Ferraris, and the way that he blew by Fernando. I was just like, oh my God. And then just like, I thought it was kind of interesting because Fernando kind of hung with him for a lap or two, and then all of a sudden it was like 4 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. What was it, 15 seconds in the end by the time it was all said and done. I was just like, wow, there's two classes in Formula One. There's Red Bull and there's everyone else. It was just, it was mind-blowing, just crazy.
Yeah, and Sergio was close to Max on pace this weekend too, which is positive to see because I wasn't too sure just how close he was going to be able to get to Max this season. But hey, he's shown up. He's definitely shown up, and it was interesting. I was monitoring both of their radios towards the end of the race, and I don't know if you remember when Max was on the radio complaining about a weird noise that was coming from behind him, like so in the engine area, while he was going down some of the straights. It was around that time where his engineer said, we want you to start targeting, I think it was lap times of 33 flat, so 33.0, 33.1, and he was doing like 32.8, 32.7, and even though, I sit here and I say 1 minute, 32 seconds, 7, even though I sit here and say that, and for the average listener, it may just be like, oh, well, it doesn't sound like much. It's kind of like, he's really on it at that moment, and he's being very consistent. And one of the things he's being consistent at is trying to claw back Sergio Perez so he can pass him for the lead. But on top of all of that, too, was trying to get the fastest lap of the race, and he didn't get it until like the very last lap. And it was interesting because Sergio was getting a different kind of message because he was also getting the same sort of thing of like, hey, we want you to target 33.0, 33.0, and he's asking like, hey, was Max doing the same thing, right? And sure enough, he wasn't. And then obviously at the end, he gets the fastest lap, and Sergio's in the cool down room, and he's like, yeah, the fastest lap? He's like, what was going on there, right? So I think we are going to see some stuff between these two guys as this season starts to unfold because it's really going to get tight, Dailey at the top, and I'm here for it.
Oh, it's already started. Did you notice, like, in the paddock, like, afterwards, Sergio went around and hugged and high-fived literally everyone there. I mean, a lot of the Aston Martin guys, which he knows when they used to be Racing Point / Force India, so they were just as happy for him that he won today. Then he went over to his own crew and everything, and he went around. But the one person that didn't even move or blink an eye was Jos Verstappen. I mean, oh my God! Those were daggers he out for Sergio, and obviously, like when it comes to the Verstappens, like anything other than winning a race is kind of like, I would say, a wasted weekend. But certainly that is not what they're showing up to do, and I think there's a lot of beef between these two going back to what happened last year. I mean, I think that we were all shocked when we heard Max's tirade there at the end of the Brazilian Grand Prix last year, and that's when it all kind of came out. And then there was like the allegations that were levied that Sergio crashed on purpose in qualifying at Monaco. So I think that there's something beneath the surface here, and if these guys kind of like go back and forth all season long, trading wins and stuff like that, and I thought about this because I knew at some point we were going to talk about it. At some point, I just can't believe that they would let Sergio win the championship, like if it gets really, really tight, because do you really want to have that conversation at some point, like next year, that Sergio's like, well, I'm reigning world champion. Max only has 2 championships. I've got one. What makes him that much better than me? I just have a feeling at some point that, and we've seen how ruthless they are at rotating drivers in and out of those cars. So I don't really, I can't see a situation where it kind of gets to like Lewis Rosberg type, like, toxicity. It might, but I would, like of all the teams, I would just expect them to come clearly and say, you're 1, you're 2, and Sergio, Max is our boy. We built this team and this car around him, and if you don't like it, too bad. If you don't want to be here, Danny Ricciardo sitting in the wings, plus
Yep.
you know 18 or 19 other guys that would love to get in your seat. So
Yep.
yeah,
100%. Verstappen leads championship with the 44 points. Sergio Perez trails with 43. Fernando Alonso is third with 30. Carlos Sainz is fourth with 20 points. Lewis Hamilton is tied with him with 20 points as well. Then comes George Russell. Dailey, I mean, the Red Bull on another planet, and it's interesting to hear some of the other drivers talk about it. Especially Lewis Hamilton, who said that he's never seen a car so fast. He said it's the fastest car he's ever seen compared to the rest. And when we were fast, we weren't that fast. I'm going to argue that.
I remember, you know, from the years 2014 to 2021,
Exactly.
where there was a lot of times where there was like the silver Mercedes and a lot of daylight between, you know, everyone else. I mean, there were some challengers interspersed in there. We had some good years there where with Sebastian and the Ferrari kind of mixing it up with them, and other times where they were just literally blowing the door, like I wouldn't say that these cars don't have doors, but you know what I mean, blowing the wheels off of everyone else, right?
I remember there was a time, so when like the hybrid power units came online in 2014, which is the current power units that they run now, when those engines were introduced, Mercedes like nailed a home run with theirs and also the car as well, and they were lapping in a race almost up to like fourth place in some races, if I remember correctly. That's ridiculous. Like,
Yep.
They weren't. Red Bull hasn't been doing that just yet. Like, those Mercedes were wicked fast, man, and nobody could touch them. Nobody.
That reminded me, like when I was growing up in the 80s. I remember some of these, like you know, like the Williams Honda era, like with like Patrese and Mansell and Piquet. Yeah. And I went back and watched a race. I think it was like the 1986 or 1987 British Grand Prix or something like that. It could have been Piquet and Mansell that year, whichever year it was. And it was crazy because this was like the era where you had like turbos and normally aspirated cars. They were literally lapping guys after like about 4 or 5 laps, like the slowpokes. And same thing. They literally lapped the entire field. It was just absolutely insane. And then, like, because when that era came in, like about 10 years ago, I kind of had like a deja vu when I was a kid watching the Williams and also the McLarens just like literally lapping everyone but themselves. And then it was like a flashback. It was just like, you know, it was like modern retro. But it you know, I just find those comments from Lewis a little bit kind of like ironic, because I kind of feel like the natural progression from this is that at some point the other teams are going to start complaining that they're living off of ill-gotten gains, that, you know, like the basis of this car is the car from last year, which was developed, you know, for this, you know, like under the overspend, which, you know, was like catering according to Red Bull, and you know, was questioned and you know, rather dubiously by everyone else. And I just feel at some point that's where it's going to go if they continue to dominate. I mean, I don't think that there's any, you know, recourse that anyone else has at this point, but I feel like that's going to be the natural progression.
Well, here's the thing. Here's one of the ways I kind of look at all this. So, I mean, obviously with Red Bull, you know, they've developed an incredible car. Adrian Newey and company back at the factory. You know, this car is a monster. No question about it. But this is and I said this on SportsCenter, this is a different Formula One. It just is. It's different because there's a cost cap. There is restriction on wind tunnel testing time and CFD design. And for those who don't know, those are basically some of the ways that they make these cars fast. And at the end of every season, team who wins the Constructors' Championship, so last year was Red Bull, they get the least amount of time in the wind tunnel. Plus, they took a sporting penalty for what Mark had just mentioned, which puts them down to around 65, 66%, if I'm not mistaken,
like that. Yep.
of wind tunnel testing time. if we go back and we look at everybody else, everyone else gets more. So then it goes Ferrari, then it goes Mercedes, and then it goes McLaren, and then, Alpine, then McLaren, then Alfa Romeo, then Aston Martin. So the Aston has a ton of wind tunnel testing time. A lot. So much. They have the budget as well to stay and push up against the cost cap. Now, it's interesting that, we haven't seen, there were some upgrades this weekend to some of the teams and some of the cars. They were somewhat minor. We didn't have major upgrades. If we go back and we look at 2022 and you take a look at the beginning of the season, and I'll use Aston Martin as an example because they're a good one. They were at the back. They had one of the worst cars on the grid, and it was slow. And I'm not just saying a little bit slow. I'm saying it was slow. Mm-hmm. And they introduced a huge upgrade at the Spanish Grand Prix. And it took them a few races to try and figure it out. But once they figured it out, they started bringing upgrades to the car. They started hitting home runs with these upgrades. They went from being one of the slowest cars on the grid to, one of the cars that was battling in the midfield and in for points. So that's how fast this can turn around. Okay. So Red Bull at the moment, I would say they've got about 2/10 gap from Red Bull to Ferrari in qualifying. And then the race is more, obviously. And that comes down a lot to tire management. How does the car use the tires? And where are they getting their aerodynamics from? Mercedes is going to be introducing an upgrade to this car in about 3 to 4 races time. And from my understanding, this car is going to look way different. Way different. And so what you get there is you get a major upgrade. You don't know what it's going to do. We don't know what type of performance they're going to be able to get from that. So, Dailey, there's a lot of things here that people still need to kind of keep their eyes on. I mean, this thing isn't over. I mean, has Red Bull built up a nice cushion? Absolutely. Are they going to add to it? For sure. But who's to say that by the time we get to race 10, that gap's been cut more in half? We're talking, race lap times of tenths, not, almost seconds.
Oh, exactly. I think you raised a number of really, really good points there. And just 10 years ago almost when we got into this turbo hybrid era, like you said, it was Mercedes that got everything right. And we come into the new era of Formula One that was introduced for last year. It was Red Bull that just everything was right. They knew they had a great power unit with the Honda. And is anybody ever going to doubt a design team that's headed by Adrian Newey? No, I don't. You shouldn't. If you don't, or if you do, then you should probably do a little bit more research because, he's a proven, I wouldn't say a winner. I think he's a proven genius at this point. He's just... He knows what it takes to design and build a fantastic race car. And let's not forget that Red Bull themselves know what it takes to win races and championships. Mm-hmm. Just ask Sebastian Vettel that has an entire house full of trophies and world championships. When you go back to the 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, all those championship years that they won. Yeah, sure, they had a little bit of a lean patch in between there, but it took a long time for everyone to catch up. But more to your point is they're the team that are out front right now, and everybody else is trying to catch up. And you hear Toto talking about, we're making changes to the car. This is going to be a fundamentally different car 3, 4, 5 races down the road. Aston Martin, they're finally doing what we've wanted to see them do the last couple of years. When I heard Lawrence Stroll was going to, and his group were going in to buy this team and take it over, I'm like, Lawrence Stroll is not going to do this just as a vanity thing. He's going in there properly. He's going to invest the money. They're going to be there to be contenders and winners. And it's taken a while. And, our podcast, we've been critical about them, but it's always been I think, warranted criticism. And, we saw, like you say, that huge upgrade package that they introduced in Spain last year. And, and as you also correctly pointed out, it took them a while to figure it out, but they got it figured out. And boy, does that Aston Martin look great now. I mean, they've leapfrogged Mercedes, they've leapfrogged the Ferraris. And as Fernando said, yeah, the Red Bulls are still, an arm length away, but I don't think that anybody at Aston Martin is disappointed where they are right now to get a couple of podiums to start off the beginning of the season, realizing, okay, yeah, Red Bull's, quite a bit ahead of us and everyone else, but they're going to be motivated to catch them. I mean, obviously they're going to be a little bit frustrated what happened to Lance today, but that's a different story. But it's I guess I shouldn't jump to conclusions, but I don't know in this modern era of Formula One if Red Bull is dominant right now, if they can stay as dominant in this new era of Formula One that Mercedes was previously. I think in a long-winded way, that's what I'm trying to get to. So
yeah, no, I agree with that. I don't think they can stay at that level of dominance that Mercedes had just because the formula is different now. The regulations are totally different now. Like I'd mentioned, the cost cap, and then also the wind tunnel and CFD reduction time that every team has to kind of go through. It's all different now, and I think things are going to change. I mean, I think just like for Formula One fans that have been around the sport for so long and so used to seeing like dominance, it's got to be one of those things in your soul that's just like, no, you know what I mean? It's just like painful to watch, but like, I don't think this is it. I don't like the Red Bull's awesome. Don't get me wrong. That thing is a thing of beauty, but at the end of the day, I think some of these teams, I think they can claw back some of that performance. I think this thing can be closer as we get further into this season, because we still don't know how Red Bull's sporting penalty is going to affect them this year either. So there's so many different things still on the table. Dailey, Aston Martin, very impressive this weekend. I didn't think they were going to be as good at this track. And when I looked at Bahrain, they were great in the braking zones. They were great in high speed. They were great in the corners, essentially. But in the straight line, they just did not have that straight line pace. And you come to this track in Jeddah where you need a lot of straight line pace. And man, they were able to find trade-offs, like big trade-offs. Like they really capitalized on their braking and their heavy braking moments, and they really capitalized on the high-speed sections. I mean, Lance's purple sector 1 in Q3, he had a mistake at turn 22, so that's essentially coming to the end of sector 2, starting sector 3. If he had to piece that lap together, we're talking about Lance being like maybe third, fourth fastest. Like that was a hell of a lap that Lance was putting in qualifying. The car looks great. I mean, and listening to Alonso and how happy he is with this thing, I mean, the baseline that they have got with this car, because they weren't even too sure, right? They were like, yeah. I remember hearing from Mike Crack after Bahrain, and he even said, like, look, let's keep our feet on the ground. Let's not get too carried away. We don't know what this car is going to be like when we go to Saudi Arabia, which is another different type of track than Bahrain, and we don't know what it's going to be like in Australia. But now they've been able to accumulate a lot of data daily, and they look good, man. This is going to be a scary team, I think, when we get really into this season.
You know what? The one thing that really stood out for me today that really has got me convinced that this is a good car is after Fernando's pit stop, he was driving around, had several laps on the hard tires, and he said, he radios back to the pits and he says, guys, I really like how these tires feel. When a lot of the other drivers up to that point in the race were complaining about how the hard tires weren't working for them.
Yeah,
and I thought, keep in mind that this is also the hard tires that, take more time to get into that real sweet spot, and the fact that the tire warmers this year have been detuned, if you want to call it, down to 70 degrees Celsius. So I just felt that was a real kind of like aha moment when I heard Fernando, like, and you could tell like that you could hear the satisfaction in his voice. You could just feel that, or you could just tell that the car and the tires, the whole package was just really working for him. But more to your point, I love how that they're able to kind of play to their strengths rather than being held back by some of the weaknesses that they have in the car. And it's just going back to qualifying, and of course we had Charles, who qualified in P2 but then took the penalty, so kind of moved everybody up a spot. But you had Fernando qualifying third and Lance sixth, and then second and fifth. But yeah, it's just too bad that he had that one little mistake at the end there, because I mean, he just that purple sector he set in sector one was just really kind of like mind blowing, and that's what I mean. I'm loving what I'm seeing from them right now. Granted, we still have 21 races to go or whatever it is, but it's encouraging because Mark Hamilton and myself on our show, we've been really kind of gone all in with the obvious heavy Canadian connection and influence in that team to see them do good, and it just hasn't really materialized until into this year. But you got like a combination of solid ownership, you got like like the new factory, the new facilities, you got a couple of good drivers. And I mean, how many races does Lance have now? Like 130? I mean, I still feel like he's this fresh-faced, like 17-year-old, where he's like, I wouldn't say a grizzled vet, but I mean, he's got a lot of races under his belt, and it was unfortunate that the car let go on him today because, unfortunately, I mean, great result for Fernando, obviously get a P3, but Lance has got to feel disappointed because knowing that
P4.
There was points on the table for him as well, just like
big
they were
points.
in Bahrain. Yeah, 100%, right?
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough to watch. I mean, a great pass on Carlos Sainz there in the opening
I
lap.
loved it.
Yeah, it's pretty good, man. And I honestly, he looks good considering missing preseason testing. And I always say this, how important preseason testing is, and I can't stress that enough. But he's looking solid. He's looking solid. I mean, last I want to say in Bahrain, about 6/10, and he's cut that down to around 3/10 now, maybe even more. I think his qualifying lap would have been way closer to Fernando if he had have stitched it all together. George Russell coming in fourth, Lewis Hamilton fifth. Mercedes actually looking not too bad in the race, and even with tire management, better than the Ferraris, Daily. Like, what the hell is going on here, man?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because, I mean, I feel like we're seeing, like, despite all the struggles that they had last year with the W13 and its, successor, the W14, and the fact that this car is going to evolve significantly over the weeks and months ahead. I mean, we're seeing some improvements, and Ferrari just continue to struggle. But, I don't want to throw too much shade at them and criticize them just yet, because I mean, like, Fred Vasseur's been on the job for 13 days or something like that. I mean, he came in really late during like the off season, and so
started in January. So.
Exactly. So I mean, a lot of what I mean, he can make those changes. Okay, this is what we're gonna do. Like the racy stuff, right? I mean, the car itself. Like the development and evolution of the car, it's going to take for some time for those, any initiatives spearheaded by Fred Vasseur to really manifest themselves. So, this is going to be a large holdover, bring over from last year, whatever you want to call it. But, just kind of like frustrating, again, if you're a Ferrari fan, because I think that a decent recovery drive for Charles. I mean, considering the reliability issues he had last week, but when compared to the other teams in the top three, I mean, there seems to be a bit of a gap between them as well, between Aston Martin, obviously, and even now to Mercedes. And I I don't think it's too unfair to say that Mercedes haven't really been lights out the first couple of races, but they definitely, if I compare them sort of straight up with Ferrari, I think I'm going to go a little bit more, put my money more on Mercedes to get this thing right sooner than Ferrari. They got some work to do there.
Yeah, they do. I know Mercedes is, like we had mentioned closer to the top of the show here, they're going to have a big upgrade coming. That upgrade, it'll be interesting to see what happens with that, because listening to Toto on Friday, he did make mention that, do they have enough money, cost cap wise, to redo this entire car? Well, they don't. And to change the chassis, you can't do that either. So I'm wondering if the chassis is overweight, where with the Red Bull, they've got something that's a little bit lighter. And then on top of that, the real performance, it's coming from the floor of the car, and it's coming with how the front wing interacts with the air and directs it to the bottom of the car, and then how are the side pods also working in conjunction with all of that and the rear of the car. So for Mercedes, the upgrade that they probably, I'm assuming, are going to bring, it's going to be, this car is going to look totally different. It's not going to look anything like this once they're done doing whatever it is they're trying to do. It's going to take a while. I'm assuming they probably won't be done making big upgrade changes until maybe Spain, maybe a bit after as well, maybe Silverstone at the same time. So there's some windows there to hit with this car. But I think if, like I'd said, they can nail upgrades, they'll be okay. With Ferrari, it's a little bit different. They seem very tentative with the engine, not running it at full power for free practice 3 was a bit concerning. Same goes with quali. I don't really think they had that engine in full quali mode either, Daily. So reliability being one of their issues for sure. How the tire interacts with the car for race distances is another thing. And these are all things that they were supposed to be working on in the off season, right? Like, frustrating to see.
well, definitely, right? I mean, when we take a look at this team that, we just, basically referred heavily to the Mercedes era of 2014 to, I don't know, bring it up to maybe even 2021. I mean, even though Max wins that championship, I mean, it went back and forth between Max and Lewis, and then came down to obviously a very controversial season finale that year. It's just really kind of weird to see them struggle, but we've seen a couple of different signs that of improvement. Not even just some little flashes here in the first couple of races this year, but I mean, take it back to Brazil last year, which was kind of like George Russell's, like, I don't know, arrival party, whatever you want to call it. I mean, like, it really signaled to the that he's a really, really good Formula One driver, and this wasn't a completely hopeless car. But I just find it really interesting coming into this season, knowing all the issues that they had with the car last year, that this year's car was almost a Control C, Control V, cut and paste kind of job, right? And that it just seemed so strange to say that, okay, well, we all know that they've thought for the longest time that if we can just uncork the potential that we think that this philosophy, that this car could have, then it would be a game changer. But they just haven't been able to do that. So that's why I just kind of found it kind of interesting that saying that they brought this new car to this season, and then we're like, well, if it doesn't work, we've got plans for something completely different, which is now the route that they're going to go down. It seems very strange to kind of like hear that language from a team that's, to me, has always been very decisive and very certain about what they're doing. But I guess compared to like the glory years over the past 10 years or so, is now they're in a different position because they're chasing rather than leading. They're not the ones that everybody's trying to catch up to, as they're trying to catch up to the Aston Martins and the Red Bulls of the world, especially the Red Bulls, right? Qualifying
pace for them looks actually not too bad. Like I'd mentioned, probably around 2.5 tenths shy of the Red Bull, but obviously the race pace is where everything's sort of letting them down at the same time. Alpine, we finally really got to see what they are all about this season so far, because in Bahrain, obviously with Esteban Ocon's penalties, like we had mentioned, and Pierre Gasly starting like dead last for that race, Alpine's looking pretty good. Like, I think, again, same thing, updates, what's that car going to look like in a few races time. Last season, they were really good at nailing their upgrades and being aggressive with bringing upgrades to the car. And I think a lot of that had to do with Alonso just being so forceful with everything. But both Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly finishing 8th and 9th. At one point, I thought those two were going to get together. I think it was on the restart after the safety car, but that would have been interesting. But outside of that, I mean, both doing a pretty impressive job. Dailey, what do you think?
Yeah, it would have been interesting, especially all the, if they came together, especially after they've been saying, hey, all the stories that we don't get along, or, we're actually pretty good bros, So that would have kind of like proved or disproved that theory. But yeah, I mean, P8 and P9 for Ocon and Gasly, only a couple of seconds between them. And if you look where they were compared to Charles, they weren't really that far behind Charles either. So, I mean, obviously maybe, Ferrari isn't the benchmark you want to measure yourself again. But, after the less than ideal start to the season in Bahrain 2 weeks ago, I think this is a really solid result for them. They get a nice handful of points. They, more importantly, both cars finish the race, and I think it's something that they can really take, be satisfied with and move on to the next race and see where it goes from there. But so funny, I was kind of having like 2020 flashbacks that was a racing point, with that BWT and the pink livery, which I think is really cool. But yeah, it's interesting. You can tell it's like, without even asking, it's like, Otmar, which sponsors did you bring with you when you left Aston Martin? It's pretty obvious, who are which money follows Otmar around when he in the paddock. But yeah, no, it's great to see. I think they're a team definitely to keep an eye on this year.
Kevin Magnussen grabbing some points for Haas, finishing 10th, getting Yuki Tsunoda on a really nice pass down into T1 late in the race. Kevin, I think, needed that. I mean, Nico Hülkenberg, who finished P12, he's been really good since coming back, and I think he's caught Kevin Magnussen out, and I think Magnussen needed this result today.
Yeah, 100%. After the last couple of years and some I think some pretty warranted questions about the driver lineups that they've had, especially 2 years ago. I really liked the fact that they brought Nico Hülkenberg in. I know that Mick Schumacher was going to be another project, I think, kind of going into the season. And when I heard that they decided to bring Nico Hülkenberg and give him that second seat, that really said to me that their thought process over at Haas is, this is a car that we think is capable of consistently finishing in the points, and we want to put it in the hands of drivers that we think are capable of giving us consistent point finishes. So, obviously that didn't happen a couple of weeks ago, and Hulk, he finishes just out of the points today. I felt like that he needs a couple of races to really get 100% comfortable with the car. I think, like you say, he's done a pretty good job so far. I think he's been pushing Kevin Magnussen as well, and I think this is going to be a fun one to watch as well, because they've really been languishing kind of there like in the last couple of years, and I think that this will be an interesting team to watch. And like I say, I think they believe that this they have a car that can score points. So now the question is, can K-Mag and Hulk deliver the points that Gunther and Gene Haas think that this car can deliver?
Let's move on. Zhou Guanyu, really good performance from him. I know obviously he's not scoring points, but he blew Valtteri Bottas out of the water this weekend. I mean, hearing from Valtteri, it was a tough weekend. I mean, Jeddah's a tough track in general if you don't have your confidence and if you don't trust the car, and if you're having way too many issues with the car, you kind of have to, if you picture it this way, Jeddah is not a track that you just kind of go easy flat out with everything and push everything to the limit right away. It's a track that you really have to build up into. So by the time you get to qualifying and deep into qualifying, that's where you're going to start playing with how close to that limit can you get, because with this track, when it bites big time, and it's going to cost you a lot of money, like Mick Schumacher experienced last season. So I think for Zhou Guanyu to deliver the performance in the Alpha that he did this weekend, very impressive. He did very impressive this weekend. Same with Nick de Vries. who again didn't get free practice 3. They were changing out, believe they were changing something out with the power unit for free practice 3, if I remember correctly, and he didn't even get any running at all. And free practice 3 sets you up for qualifying, gets you ready for qualifying, gets your confidence so you can go and extract the performance from yourself and from the car. And for Nick, I mean, really good job this weekend. Really good job. Same with Oscar Piastri. Very impressive, outpacing Lando Norris. Piastri in P15 and Norris all the way back in P17. What do you make of that? What do you make of that, Dailey? Because Piastri towards the end of that race was all over Lando's ass and like.
I loved it. I loved it. You know, like obviously when you're a rookie that comes into Formula One, you're going to have eyes on you. But I think there are more eyes on Piastri just because of the way that, you know, he got that seat at McLaren. 100%. I mean, you know, like the whole situation with Alpine and the whole social media rebuttal, and then, you know, the kind of displacing Ricardo and all that. So I think that everybody kind of had their eyes. It's like, okay, who is this guy? Is he as good as, you know, like as they're kind of making him out to be? So, I mean, we're only 2 races into his Formula One career. He obviously only got a handful of laps of Bahrain a couple of weeks ago, but the way that he was fighting straight up with Lando, and I love Lando. I think Lando is a very good driver. And obviously this car is not a great car, and I mean, that's a completely different discussion. But regardless, I mean, in similar, like identical equipment to his teammate, I love the feistiness that we saw from Piastri right at the end. That, okay, we might be at the back of the pack here, but, you know, because that's your benchmark, because always your teammate. And I thought that was it was good to see that the fight in Piastri and take it to Lando like that. So
very
cool
impressive.
moment.
Yeah, very impressive from Oscar this weekend, considering the type of track that, you know, Jeddah is. It's, you know, it doesn't suit well for rookies, and if rookies have crashes there, it sets them back quite a bit, because like I said, when it bites big time. And for Piastri, just a load of confidence coming into qualifying for sure.
Love it.
Oh my God, man. I was like, who is this kid think he is? I'm like that old man sitting on the couch, like watching him, like, but no,
shaking your fist at the
yeah,
TV.
extremely impressive. I'm excited to see what he can do later on this season, and he's gonna give Lando a run big time. Logan Sargent, great job from Logan as well. Considering where he ended up, I think, you know, he had done a nice job to hold on to position for as long as he could. He got close to almost getting up into a point-scoring position at one point. Ended up dropping back to 16th, but Logan's looked pretty solid. Dailey coming home P16. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he did a great job really mixing it up there in the pack. But let's not forget, in his debut 2 weeks ago, he finished P12 where his teammate finished P10. So I think that I think he's pretty close to where Alex Albon is, which I think is a pretty good measuring stick, considering Alex has been around in Formula One. He's been with some pretty big teams, and so, you know, he's pretty much settled in and knows what he needs to do. So I like what I'm seeing from Logan, but despite the fact that, you know, he wasn't able to maintain that position that he had that was just sort of outside of the points, he didn't make it easy for the other drivers that were trying to take those track positions away from him. So I'm liking what I'm seeing, but just in general, I'm also liking what I'm seeing from Williams. Sure, they haven't shot up to like a top 5 team, but clearly there is an improvement that we've seen from last year. And then, I mean, sure, Alex got points last weekend, but maybe this is a car that can sneak into the points occasionally. And I think, Logan, if he can keep it up, maybe he's got a chance to score some points this season, which I think would be great.
As for Alex Albon, obviously DNFing with what the team is calling an issue in the mechanical brake system. That could have been kind of scary, seeing as, this is a heavy braking circuit, so I wouldn't want to have that type of an issue. Dailey, this has been great. Do you want to stick around and do some Twitter questions?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay, cool. All right, Dailey, thanks very much for sticking around. Let's head on over to Twitter and take some of your questions, because they're actually are quite a few. And my apologies for mispronouncing all of your names. I suck at it, but I'll do my best. And I'll start with your Twitter handle at PeroxYLush. I don't know. Oscar Gould. I don't know. Why is there a discussion about which driver of the same team should go ahead of the other? Question mark. Discussions with Perez and Max today has happened with Mercedes as well. Is there a logic to this strategy? And if so, what is it? Dailey, do you want to take that one or do you want me to grab it?
I'll try and bite this one off. First of all, I was thinking about like Max and Checo today. I think that if Max came to the point where he was like threatening to like take the lead from Perez, I think that, if there's any sort of team orders, I think they give that one to Checo because he recorded the pole. He led basically every single lap. I mean, except for a couple, that Fernando was leading at the beginning. So he kind of earned it. I mean, under normal circumstances, I don't believe we would have seen Perez take pole. I think it would have been Max's, but I think that Checo would have got this one, just on the basis of, what he did over the course of the weekend. Now, it's kind of interesting, too, that if the championship gets a little bit closer, or if, say, it was, Max is fighting with Fernando or Lewis, and Checo's further down in the standings, then, they tell him, buddy, pull on over, let Max through. He needs maximum points here, so Lewis doesn't close that gap, or Fernando, whoever, right? But I think usually, I mean, when it comes down to things like that, there will be, like they'll give preference to the number one driver. But then it was kind of interesting too. Today we saw, with the McLarens, and I think also with the Mercedes as well, as sometimes you just got to let the faster car through. So I think there is kind of like the written rule, but then sometimes there's the unwritten rule of like what's happening out on the track as well, right?
From at Chris in the Six, why didn't Max park his car next to Checo and Alonso's on the main straight? Well, I don't think there's anything too suspicious to look into that, Don, but it was odd, but he may not have also been given the message at the same time. But that being said, the FIA does release documents stating where parc fermé and parking procedures will take place for the top three drivers. So maybe he didn't have a look at that. From at 305 KMGP, what are the chances Gene Haas has to sell the team due to his recent dealings with Russia? Could Andretti buy in that way? I believe Haas has actually denied that report, and I believe it was from the PBS, and I believe they denied it over on their website. It was Wednesday or Thursday, so head on over there and you can get the news on that.
Yeah, I just want to jump in for a second. Yeah, they hit back pretty hard on that, saying that there was equipment that was shipped, but it was already in transit. It was before the whole thing, before the war started, the invasion on all that, and
sanctions.
Thank you. Yes, yeah. So they were pretty they were pretty detailed and pretty clear on what they were. They feel like they haven't done anything wrong, and that they wouldn't do anything like that. So as we talked about in our show the other day, that we kind of feel like that this story isn't over, that either there's going to be some sort of retraction or more details coming from like the reporters, or there's going to be some sort of legal action or something like that. Like I say, watch this space. I don't think that story's done yet.
From at Rytech, yes, is Aston Martin third at this point? I would say second. Yeah, that's what I would say. It's just they haven't gotten all of the points that they should have by now. I mean, like we were saying, Dailey, if Lance finishes P4 and doesn't get a DNF, we're talking about a different team in second place.
Yeah, totally right. And I like what I'm seeing from Lance this year. Like Mark Hamilton and I, we bought property in Lance Stroll Island a long time ago, and we haven't had a lot of neighbors come in, but over the past couple of races, we've had people come in, stay for lunch, and look around. So joking aside, I think people are starting to give Lance a little more cred. Like I still feel like Lance doesn't get his fair, like he doesn't get his due respect. I just hate that argument at this point that he's only in Formula One because his old man's got a lot of money and basically bought him a team so he can race in Formula One. This just drives me like bananas at this point. But he's a good driver, and had his car not let him down today, he would have got some serious good points, just like he did 2 weeks ago. I think that Lance is doing a great job, Fernando's doing a great job, and for me, just like you, Aston Martin is at this point, I don't think there's a question as to for competition who is number two. 2 races into the season, they're the second best team.
At Ketchup Chip Fan. Nice. I like ketchup chips.
That's a good one.
It's pretty good. With Ferrari's poor pace today, are they now the 4th best team on the grid? Daily.
Yes. They are. You've got the Mercedes sandwich. You've got Aston Martin on one side. You got Ferrari on the other side. I think that Ferrari, they're there, but they're not quite as good as the other. They might switch back and forth places with the Mercedes, but not really a lot to be really excited about. The one thing I will give them some cred for is that at least they're not making real head scratching calls on the pit wall.
Yeah.
Although it was kind of interesting that Charles did call out his his engineer at one point.
Zavi,
to say, you got to tell me these things. Come on. So it's not perfect, but I mean, at least we're not having all those things. It's just hey, if the people at home know this was the wrong call, how come we're the only people? You're the only people literally on the face of the earth, and you're right there. You didn't realize this was the wrong call. So I will give them some credit that and that's where I think Vassir's influence is going to be. It's going to be in strategy. It's going to be those on the call, on the fly calls during the race. And I think till they get the car that he wants designed and built and on the track, that's where we're going to see his influence on the team.
From @no_name account. Okay. Mercedes is doing way better than their despair indicates. Agree or disagree? They are faster than Ferrari and more reliable than Aston. No, it's not good there. They had a good race on Sunday, but if you go back to Bahrain, it was a disaster. I mean, absolute mess. The team is furious, frustrated. I think eventually Mercedes. Okay, hear me out here. I think Mercedes eventually ends up second in the championship. What do you think?
I could see that happening, but I agree with what you say. They were a mess after the race, because Lewis, he kind of it was kind of like the passive aggressive throwing them under the bus, but not really. And that's why I thought it was kind of interesting when we got to media day on Wednesday or Thursday or whatever it was. He kind of walked those comments back a little bit, right? So I thought that was kind of interesting. But I mean, at the end of the day, I still kind of believe. I still really believe in the team. I think we can get better. They could be, right. I mean, they will. The big question is, how good is this car going to be once they get all the bits on it that they want to put onto it, when they get the full upgrades on there? If they're still behind Aston Martin at that point, I think we have to kind of look at it Tim, are you still sure that they could get seconds? But at this point, I will agree with you. I think it's possible.
Yes.
Because I don't want to write them off, because in the past, whenever they've had a real issue, they've always found a way to solve the problem. Mind you, that was back in the day that you could spend whatever you wanted. And now, you've got to be a little bit more frugal and make choices, and you have to live within the cost cap. So there's that.
And then plus listening to Lewis after qualifying, I mean, Hamilton even said he's not even confident driving this car. When was the last time you ever heard Lewis Hamilton ever say anything like that ever? That just
last year.
No, but like him actually like coming out saying, like compared to last year, he's still saying that he doesn't have the confidence in this car. I mean, that's not a good sign when your driver says that. It's like when Franz Tost said on Friday that like he doesn't trust any of his engineers because they gave him false information and they thought this car, this AlphaTauri car, was going to be great, and it turns out it's not great at all. I mean, it's like stuff like that, right? Like, he actually came out and like said it. That's pretty big stuff for Lewis to actually say. I've never heard, aside from that one time last year, never heard Lewis really.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation, because when you watched Lewis drive around Jeddah over the weekend, did you ever get the impression he was pushing that car to the limit? I didn't.
No, you can see.
No.
Now you can even see.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why George qualifies him, right? Like, just has that capability of taking that car to the limit. He was comfortable enough to figure that out, where Lewis is still a little bit more behind. But I think once Lewis gets into feeling comfortable again, and like you said, they bring upgrades to this car, I mean, this will turn around for him, no problem. I mean, he's a 7-time Formula One world champion, one of the greatest of all time for a reason. Dailey, this has been great. Thanks, man, very much for coming on. Let everybody know what you got going on, where they can find you.
Well, you can find us. We're the Scuderia F1 Pod. You can find us Apple, Spotify, wherever. And best way to get in touch with us is on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod. Do usually a race wrap-up, usually with this guy, Mr. Harani. And then we've got our weekly show on, usually drop Thursday nights or Friday mornings.
All right, buddy. Thanks again for coming on. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Loved it. Thanks very much.
Okay, let's head on over to Grid Rival and update our standings board on how everyone's doing in our league. We have 429 players. That's ridiculous. It's great. Love it. This is following the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. I'll just run through the top 10. In first place is Laris T with 2,026 points. Apologies if I butcher your names. Josh Swimmy with 2021. Jay Hamilton 98 with 2008. Then Creek Chubbs, followed by Feldman. Hey, it's Feldman from across the hall in fifth. C. Nolan in 6th. C. Nolan 55 and 6th. Then it's the Lizard King. And then Jeremy Tezang, and Cam Jam Bam 99, all tied for 6th. And then rounding out the top 10 is Skeltrax. Nice. This is good. Good stuff. I'm happy to see all this. I don't even know where I am in this league. I don't think I'm doing very well. But what are you going to do? Anyways, thanks very much, everybody, for listening. Really appreciate it. My name's Tim Harani. You've been listening to Nailing the Apex. Catch us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Please head on over to Spotify. Give us a 5-star rating and a follow. Apple Podcasts, please give us a rating, write a review. Helps us grow the pod a lot. Thanks again, everybody, for listening. We'll talk to y'all later.